If we had the pleasure of meeting before I made my way into Lorcana, you'll know that as a content creator and a player, I like to brew. I like to create new concepts for decks, maybe try cards and combinations other people aren't looking at, and that is where I find myself today, working away on a list of Amethyst Sapphire I'm lovingly referring to as Aurora Purple. This is a deck I've been playing in my spare time on Pixelborn and having mixed results with. I want to make it clear this one is definitely still a work in progress, but I do think there's something there and something worth exploring. Now that might be now, maybe that's after we get some new tools from Rise of the Floodborn, but I think it's worth sharing this deck overall and seeing if maybe the community can continue to refine it and make it into a powerhouse moving forward. I'm going to try something a little bit different in today's video. I'm going to spend some time breaking down this deck in detail for you today and going over my card choices, explaining my thought process behind the things I'm thinking when putting a deck like this together. But if you are a fan of gameplay, don't panic. I am going to be putting out some games with this deck on the channel for you to enjoy that I will link in the description below once they go live, and maybe be able to tag in one of the little YouTube tags or something if I'm able to. That should be coming for you in the next couple days. If you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to the channel here at Beyond the Inkwell. We're looking to consistently make Lorcana content here moving forward, and we're hopeful I should say, that you're enjoying the show so far. So please consider pressing that button if you haven't done so already. Drop a like, leave a comment about what you think about Amethyst Sapphire. With that said, let's take a look at this deck in detail and break it down in a card by card. So I'm going to start with an overall concept for this deck. What is it that we're looking to try and do? And the answer to that is be an aggressively slanted mid-range strategy. Now what that means is we need to be able to go quick enough to get underneath decks like Ruby Amethyst Control and be able to score up, rack up some lore before they're able to be prepared our entire board away, but we need to be able to have enough resources to grind our opponents out if they're more aggressive than us, or recover from those board wipes if we're in need of further threats in the control matchups. So do try and keep that in mind when you look at some of the card choices in this deck moving forward. We're going to start at the very bottom with the 1-cost cards here in the form of Archimedes and Pascal. Archimedes is super replaceable. I do for the most part think that 2/2 bodies are better than 1/3 bodies in a deck like this one, but if you prefer to play Flounder instead, you certainly can. There is no harm or reason not to. Pascal, I think, is a underappreciated powerhouse in this strategy and really does help us get off to some of those really early starts we were thinking about. Pascal into Aurora is quite a lot of lore on many occasions, and the perfect draws with that kind of hand can result in you shifting bigger Aurora, Dreaming Guardian, I should say, onto the smaller Aurora on turn number 3, and therefore giving Pascal Ward. And now Pascal with Evasive and Ward can be really hard for a number of decks to handle, meaning it can sometimes rack up somewhere between 6 and 7 lore in the early game, and that's a really good 1-cost card. Beyond that, it does let us kind of have a way of interacting with other evasive cards in a pinch if we really need to, but for the most part, Pascal is going to be ink for us late and lore for us early, and that's what we should be looking for. Archimedes is quite often ink in this deck. If you don't think you're playing against an aggressively slanted shell, it's going to challenge a lot more than it's going to be aggressive, but it is perfectly reasonable to run this one out on turn 1 on hands that contain Aurora Regal Princess if you're looking to get your feet on the ground very early. We'll move on to the 2-drop slot here. You'll see that we also have 8 of these, much like we do in our 1-cost, alongside 2 items to round the full number out to 10. Magic Broom is an interesting inclusion in this case. I wanted another 2-cost character that I could use to aggressively challenge in the early game against the aggro decks, and I thought originally that I wanted to play Philo, the blue 2-cost card that is a 3/1, that's capable of challenging Simba in those aggressive matchups, but I found myself coming up just a little teeny bit short against Ruby Amethyst and the other more controlling decks. So for now, I've decided to turn that body into Magic Broom and pop a Mickey into the deck that you'll see a little bit later on to give us the ability to rebuy a few more cards, fill our deck with a few more threats in spots that we really need just the extra little bit of oomph to get ourselves over the line. The Broom is going to do that for us. It's going to provide virtual card advantage whenever we find that Mickey, and more importantly, it is still a body for us in those early stages of the game to be able to challenge our more aggressive opponents. Aurora Regal Princess really is a reason to be Sapphire in my opinion. This entire package is pretty great. Just 2 cost cards that quest for 2 lore are kind of at a premium. We see that in cards like Flynn Rider, and Aurora is very much the same. She's fantastic at being able to just apply pressure early, get your lore count off to a start, and shifting herself into the bigger copy of Aurora is also as powerful as you would imagine it to be. Really can't say we're too surprised to see 4 of this one in the deck. We also have 2 copies of Magic Mirror. They are our only item. This is just another way for us to regain and recoup some cards after we start going bigger and we've started to run out of threats. We usually only want to find 1 of these over the course of the game, but finding 1 is pretty pivotal in terms of grinding through extra cards in those bigger, grindier matchups, and I found the second one was coming in handy quite a lot against the steel decks that are packing copies of Beast Hard-Headed to make sure I have a backup in case I'm in need of it. We move into the 3-drop slot, and there's quite a lot to unpack here, but for the most part we are just playing the good cards in these colours. Maleficent Sorceress has basically become a staple 4-of in nearly every single Amethyst deck moving forward. It is a great 3-cost body that just replaces itself once it comes into play. There's not an awful lot more to say about it. It's really, really good at that. Mickey Mouse Detective is a fantastic card in this deck as well. You'll see a little bit later on, but we are full of 5-cost cards, so accelerating ourselves towards them is kind of great. On top of that, our top end in this deck very much costs 7 most of the time, and Mickey is going to help get us there a whole turn earlier, sometimes a whole 2 turns earlier if we really need him to. And on top of that, he is fantastic at singing copies of Friends on the Other Side, which is obviously a fantastic, powerful card that's a reason to be Amethyst. He's a great way to leverage it, and that's fantastic. Lastly, we have Rafiki in this slot. I think this one is definitely more up in the air. I'm definitely a little concerned about how many uninkables this deck has access to in other versions of the deck we've put together, and we're definitely having to make a few concessions in card choices that we might want to play otherwise to make Rafiki work. But I think having more anti-aggro tools in this deck, more cards that are capable of challenging the aggressive early starts is great, and Rafiki's fantastic at busting through those bodyguarding Simbas and being left alive afterwards. I'm a really big fan of this card, and that's why it currently makes the cut. Moving on to those 4-cost cards, you'll see a very small selection here. The reason for that, mostly because we find ourselves going from 3 to 5 fairly often, courtesy of Mickey Mouse Detective. That being said, there is a rationale behind these cards, but they are definitely the most experimental cards in this deck, and the slots I'm open to changing the most. Inkable is important in this case. We're going to be inking these a lot in terms of our perfect draws that go from 3 to 5, but Mickey Mouse, single copy here of Wayward Sorcerer, gives us a little bit of flexibility in terms of what we can do with those magic brooms. This was originally a copy of Zeus, God of Lightning, before I added the magic brooms into the deck, and if you want to remove those brooms for another 2-cost card, I highly suggest this becomes a copy of Zeus again. That card is fantastic in this shell, in my opinion. Speaking of cards that I think are fantastic in this shell, Belle, Strange but Special really is an interesting puzzle to try and solve. I'm not sold on this card whatsoever at this point, but I think it does a lot of things this deck wants to do. Most importantly, it actually lets you ramp from 4 to 7, which is something that no other card in the game of Lorcana can currently do. We ink an extra card the turn we play Belle, and then we ink 2 extra cards the following turn, means we actually get to our copies of Ursula and Hades significantly faster than we should be able to do, and sometimes that feels exceptionally powerful and is something I want to explore. But the main reason for Belle in this deck is because I want the ability to be able to top deck a win. How many times have you played against a deck that is a Emerald deck, playing Cusco, Temperamental Emperor, Mad Hatter, these powerful cards that are questing for 3 lore. They draw 1 off the top when they're on 17 lore, and you haven't found an answer to be able to get it off the board. Belle is looking to do the same thing for us here on an even more global scale, because the majority of the time in the late game, she will be able to quest for 5, and if we have those aggressive starts that involve Pascal, Aurora, similar kind of bodies, Belle is going to do a fantastic job at stealing games we have no business winning. Moving into the 5s here, we start getting to the bulk of the kind of bread and butter of what this deck is all about. The Queen here, I think, is a very interesting inclusion for a 5. I'm a big fan of this card in the majority of shells, and I think having an inkable 5 that has a really solid body on it, and is another way for us to grind out card advantage in the games where we're going to want to be able to play it, is a nice way to fill up the spare slots we have that aren't assigned to our main bulk of our 5-cost cards. However, the Sapphire 5s are definitely part of the reason why I wanted to to explore this deck in the first place. We've alluded to Aurora Dreaming Guardian a few times in the past here. Shifting onto smaller Aurora is exceptionally powerful, and being able to give things like Pascal and especially Bell's Strange but Special Ward is an ability that is also exceptionally strong. She quests for 2 by herself, and it hasn't got the worst body you've ever seen, so it's definitely a card I'm a fan of playing 4 of in this shell. Maleficent Uninvited is a card I've talked about tons on the channel already. I think it was one of the most underappreciated cards in the first set when it was released. It is a fantastic way of just, again, providing aggressive finishes to our otherwise aggressive starts. Questing for 3 lore on a body like this is no joke, and the opponent often has to trade their entire board into this or have spot removal to be able to remove it or suffer a very early loss. Last but not least, Let It Go is definitely in the running, in my opinion, for the best spot removal in Lorcana right now, simply because it is inkable. The ability to ink this is just something that kind of goes without saying, but this deck is also fantastic at being able to shift Aurora and then sing Let It Go and do something else. It's very powerful to be able to use these bodies like Hades to provide tempo, to be able to provide even more tempo while using our ink to do more things and get ourselves on the board. Don't be afraid to use the Queen to sing this one on occasion as well. Definitely feels like it's worth it in an awful lot of spots, but this is just your answer to whatever you need it to be able to answer. It's flexible, it's powerful, and it's a card I expect to see the majority of played in most Sapphire decks moving forward. And with that, we'll go into our choice of 7-cost cards. And now, this is definitely one of the more interesting spots in this deck. I think there's maybe an argument for cards like Elsa's Spirit of Winter to be able to really push home the endgame. But for me, I wanted my cards to have an immediate impact on the board, so they weren't anywhere near as soft to things like Be Prepared and Dragon's Fire. And I think being able to accelerate to 7 is significantly more interesting thanks to Bell's Strange but Special than trying to accelerate to 8. Ursula is a card that's been finding a home in most Amethyst decks at the moment. It's just really good in these grindy control matchups. It provides you with more cards, it replaces itself immediately. 8 is such a big number. It's so hard to remove Ursula from the board by traditional character challenging. It often requires a spot removal spell or wasting a Be Prepared. And if they don't, this does quest for 3 lore, which is exactly what we want from our top end when our starts can be so fast. Secondly, we have Hades. This is another one that doesn't really feel like it has too much required to explain. It's just a fantastic tempo tool. If we staple Let It Go onto a body that can quest for 2, it's probably worth 2 extra ink to be able to do that, and that does mean it's often our endgame of choice when it comes down to kind of picking fights against the aggro decks, removing their ability to quest for 20 lore towards the end of the game and making sure you're the one that gets there first. As I kind of alluded to in the intro, this is still very much a work in progress. I think it's a deck I'm going to pursue going forward, and I truly think there is some potential tapped inside this shell. If you decide to try it out for yourself, do let me know how it goes. I'm open to feedback. You can find me over on X or Twitter at HowlingMines, or you can find us as a channel at Beyond the Inkwell. Come and tweet us, let us know how it goes for you, and if you've got any further ideas, you can leave them in the comment section below, or mention them in a tweet over there as well. If you're looking forward to gameplay of this one, as I say, it should be up on the channel within the next few days, so you can see how the deck plays out in practice as well, and hopefully you'll enjoy your fair share of that. If you haven't already, do press that button for me down below, give the channel a subscribe, stay tuned for more upcoming Lorcana content, but until then, I've been HowlingMines. You've been amazing. Take care of yourself. Have a lovely day.